Okay, hello everyone. Thank you very much for coming to the debate motions briefing. Today, I'm really excited to talk to you all about the motions that we will be using for the Fall West and East tournament, and to hopefully give you some context and maybe answer some questions. So to talk about our schedule for this seminar, first I'm going to do an overview of how to go about interpreting motions. I'm going to do this in the context of prepared motions. And then at the end, if we have time, I will talk about how to do that with impromptu motions. Then I'm going to do the West motions until about 8:35, and then the East motions from 8:35 to 9. There is a potential, just because I do have a lot to cover, that we go over 9 o'clock. If that's the case and you need to leave, I obviously understand, and you can catch the recording later. Also, for those of you that are a part of the Western tournament, you are welcome to leave after I'm finished covering those motions, as there won't be any direct information pertinent to you. But I would recommend that you stay and listen so that you can get an idea of how to approach different types of motions that you may see later on. I think that it would be helpful for you to go through the motions, even though you will not be debating those motions at this tournament. Do we have any questions before I start? Okay, awesome. So let's start with how to interpret motions. Also, for those of you that don't know how to access the motions, they are posted on the Best Foundation website. If you click on upcoming events and then you click on the actual tournament you're attending and scroll down to the bottom of the page, they're there. I'll also obviously list them in this presentation. Okay, so when you're thinking about motions in World Schools Debate, I want you to remember at all times that they should be interpreted in a reasonable manner, with arguments discussing the core of the controversy areas. So we want to talk about what would the reasonable person anticipate this debate about? What would they be arguing, and what would a reasonable person expect to be hearing in this debate? We shouldn't be talking about extreme examples. We shouldn't be defining a motion in a way that makes it unfair for the other team to debate. We should be trying to talk about the core of the issue, defining a motion that makes it so that the debate is balanced and even for both sides. If this is your first seminar, this was something I talked about a lot in the first 2 seminars, so make sure that you do watch the recordings of those to get a better idea of what I'm talking about here. So, how to interpret prepared motions. First thing that you want to do is make sure that you understand the words or the phrases being used. So ask your teammates, refer to dictionaries, use Google, just so that you understand what the motion's actually talking about, catching any wording. I know one of the motions uses the word trade-off, making sure that you truly understand what the motion is talking about. You want to note any important definitions that you may want to bring up in the debate. So for terms that might be ambiguous or that you want to clarify, make sure that you note those and talk about what those definitions are going to be. And when I say definitions, I don't mean like reading directly what dictionary.com says for that word. I mean clarifying what the definition of a word is in the context of the debate. We'll see the examples of that when we look at the motions that we have later on. The second step that you want to do is, again, think about what the core of the motion is trying to get at. What do you think that Best Foundation was thinking, and why do they want you to debate this motion? What is the core issue? How would a reasonable person interpret this motion? These are the questions that you should be asking yourself as you are thinking about arguments that you may want to make for that debate. Any questions on this? Okay, The third step you want to do is research the topic. And while you're doing that, you want to brainstorm key arguments for both sides of the motion. And you would want to do this by yourself. So every team member should probably be doing this on their own. And then after individuals have a good set of arguments, that's when you want to get with your team, because having independent thought that is kind of then comes together later is a better way to get a more diverse set of arguments. In this PowerPoint, which I will send out after, you'll see a lot of hyperlinks, so underline words in red, that lead to external articles. So for example, in this one, I linked an article about how to go about researching things like this for a speech. So you can always click on these later. I'll send these to your coaches who can pass them on to you. So as I said, individually, you want to come up with arguments for both sides of the debate. That's what I tasked my team to do this past week. And then after that, you want to come together to try to find similarities between your ideas and start to form arguments and identify your team line, your overarching argument that your team is going to make in support of both sides of the motion. Because remember, for prepared motions, you don't know which side of the debate you will be on. So you need to prepare arguments for both sides. After that, or kind of while this is all happening, take note of articles, evidence, examples, and research that you're coming across as you're researching, so that you can incorporate that into your arguments. It's nothing is more upsetting than, say, you read a 5 to 10 page article, you're not taking notes, you're not like highlighting it or anything, and then 2 days later, when you want to go incorporate things that you read from that, you have to reread it all again. So try to be strategic about how you're researching and how you're thinking about arguments. That way you don't have to do double the work. After you have a good idea of your team line and of your arguments, you want to organize your arguments into an outline. And that means that you want to include definitions, your team line, your arguments, and any sort of in that structure that we talked about of a case. I am going to work on making an outline worksheet for you all. It's not ready today. Hopefully I can do it tomorrow and include it in the email that I send out, but you can always just lean back on that case structure that I talked about in the first 2 lessons about how to organize a case. So that's when you want to start organizing your arguments into an outline, which is the same as what you would do for a speech or a paper, an essay, anything like that. And then depending on what type of debater you are, you may want to begin to write maybe an introduction or a conclusion or a core part of the argument that you think will help you in the debate. But remember, you don't want to have the entire first speech or anything after that scripted, because if you're just sitting there reading off of a piece of paper, you're not establishing that ethos, that pathos that you want to with the judge to show that you are knowledgeable about what you're talking about and you're able to make that connection. Okay, questions? Okay, I wanted to make a quick note about plagiarism. Again, you'll see these hyperlinks that talk more about plagiarism. There's another link to research. So plagiarism is something that's really important to be aware of. And that is the word that we use to talk about when somebody takes someone else's work or ideas and passes them off as their own. So what this would look like in a debate is taking somebody's article or essay or opinion about the topic and reading a very large portion of it, or maybe just, a paragraph of it without citing that person or where you got it, and pretending that it's your own thoughts or ideas. Your speech should predominantly be your own ideas and arguments, although you do want to incorporate cited research from other sources. So what that looks like is you would say, my argument is that school uniforms should be mandatory in school. And the reason for this is because most students would prefer they get to wear uniforms. According to a New York Times article, 80% of surveyed students want to have mandatory school uniforms. I obviously just made that up, but that would be an example of incorporating research or evidence into your speech that's not plagiarized. There is a full plagiarism guideline book that I've linked here that's also on the Best Foundation website that if you want to read more into it, you're welcome to. Questions about that before we go into the motions? Okay. Fall West motions. It's so exciting. It's our first tournament. So let's dive into it. The first motion, this House would abolish the Olympic Games. Second motion, this House believes that standardized tests do more harm than good. Third motion, this House supports the use of vaccine passports. I'm not going to read the info slide because my voice is already gone, but I'll give you a second to read it while I just comment generally. So I want everyone to realize that first off, this is not, the order that they are presented is not guaranteed to be the order in which you will debate them. So the first motion that everyone will debate at the tournament could be any one of these. Also, remember that the preliminary debates have 2 prepared motions and 2 impromptu motions, which means that one of these motions will be used for the final round, which means that you may or may not debate it depending on how well you're doing. So just something to keep in mind. This little section that we have here where it says info, this is called an info slide, and it's very common in World Schools debate and other parliamentary debates that are meant to clarify what the debate is supposed to be about. So we see in this one that it provides definitions of what a vaccine passport is, and it also describes some ways that they're used to give you an idea of what the debate should be about. We'll talk more about that when we get to this specific motion. So let's start with the first one that I put on the list. This House would abolish the Olympic Games. And the structure for how we're going to be discussing these motions is I'm going to talk about like general definitions of words that you might think about looking into. You don't have to use these definitions. They're just something that I thought of, but you can think of your own with your team. And then we're going to go into questions about what is the debate supposed to be like, or what are some things to think about. So let's start with first looking at key words and phrases. So abolish, that's a pretty strong word that we see in this motion. And the definition of abolish that I found was to completely do away with. And the reason why I wanted to pull out this word is because it's the action. It's what's going to be happening if this motion is passed. So the question that I would ask is, how is the word abolish different from words like pause or cancel? What do you think? What's the difference between abolish and pause or cancel? Raise your hand if you have an idea. Okay. Okay, I see a lot. Maria Georgieva. How about you?
Isn't abolish like more permanent than just pausing it or canceling it? Because pausing would be for like a certain period of time and canceling it will be like postponing it.
Absolutely. Very, very good. That's exactly correct. And that's important in this debate, right? Because we want to make sure that the debate is stronger than just should we postpone or pause the Olympic Games. It means completely do away with, they're not coming back. So something to think about. So I think that those would be the words that I would define or describe in that motion. And now let's talk about the core of the motion. So what is this motion really asking? It's basically asking, are the Olympics good? Are they worth it? Do the benefits of the Olympics outweigh the harms? So these are questions you want to talk about with your team when you're brainstorming arguments. And then when we're thinking about what types of arguments we should expect to see in a debate, what is the core of the debate about? Probably we're going to be talking about reasons why the Olympics are good and reasons why they're bad. A discussion of the people that are affected by the Olympics. So who are the stakeholders? Who are the people that participate in them? Who are the people that benefit from them? Who are the people that are hurt by them? And then what is the impact of doing away with the Olympics? What happens next? Who would it affect? How does it relate to those people that, you know, are stakeholders or care about the Olympics? Does this make sense how we're kind of going through them? Does anyone have questions about this structure, about what I've said so far? Okay, let's move on to the second motion. This House believes that standardized tests do more harm than good. So let's look at some words and phrases. Standardized tests, again, here's another hyperlink to some definitions. Exams that are administered and scored in a consistent or standard manner. So what standardized tests do you have in Bulgaria? What tests do you have that every student or almost every student will take the same or similar tests at a certain point in time in order to let them get to the next step, or for any number of reasons? I heard there's a special word for them. Usually people will take them in the end of 7th grade, I think. And then 11th graders might take some more. Yep, Dibby?
Level, maybe.
The Maturas.
Yeah, the Maturas. Dibby, you may be correct. I'm not sure. That wasn't on my list, but
Yeah.
So some ones that I listed are the Maturas, the Cambridge English exam, maybe the IELTS, maybe the SATs, any sort of entrance exam. These would be reasonable standardized tests that we would want to discuss in this debate. There might be more, and this is not just the only test that we want to talk about, but these are the ones that came to my head. So the core of the motion, what is this motion really asking? Do the harms of standardized tests, of having kids take the Maturas, the Cambridge exams, the SATs, outweigh the benefits of those exams? So what types of arguments should we expect to see in this debate? The benefits and harms of standardized tests. Just like we're thinking about the benefits and harms of the Olympic Games, this is the same type of motion when we're evaluating whether or not something is worth it or should be continued. The impact of doing away with the standardized tests. If we don't use standardized tests, how will we know how well students are doing? Alternatives to standardized tests, different ways to achieve the same goal that standardized tests have. And then when we're talking about benefits and harms of them, which benefit or harm or set of benefits or harms matter more in the context of students or teachers or colleges or universities, whatever it is. Questions about this motion? Okay. Motion number 3. This House supports the use of vaccine passports. Again, we had that info slide, and you'll see how I incorporate the informational slide into this breakdown. So keywords and phrases. There are going to be a lot, and that's just because of how big the info slide is. So vaccine passports, that was defined in the info slide as apps or documentation that approve an individual has one or more of these 3 things: received the full dose of the vaccination, recently recovered from COVID-19, or recently received a negative test result. So this is something that's important and something to think about when we're continuing on in that you might see other motions in the future. When definitions are given in information slides, teams should defer or use those definitions in the debate. That's their intent. They're meant to help clarify the debate. So for example, if a team were to go into this debate and start talking about a regular Bulgarian passport that helps you go to the EU, right? Has nothing to do with vaccines. It's not having to do with the informational slide. That would be a bad debate that's outside of the core of what the motion is trying to get at. So we want to avoid that. stick to what the info slide has to say, and maybe you can add or clarify more if that's needed. Okay. Questions about what I just said? Okay, so then the info slide gave us a little bit more information. And this is something that you would want, that a proposition team would want to clarify in that opening speech in their definition, or the opposition team, if they're making arguments based on what was given in the info slide, would want to make sure that the proposition team includes in their definition so that they know it's a fair debate. So first, the info slide told us that they are used for domestic economic activities. So things like attending bars or concerts or going to restaurants. And that the vaccine passports are also used for international travel. So allowing people to enter countries and to maybe allow them to bypass quarantine or other measures. So in this debate, we would expect that both of these discussions would be incorporated in the debates. Why should vaccine passports be used for domestic economic activities, and why should they be used for international travel? Do I have any questions? Okay, now let's get into the second half, the core of the motion. One, what vaccines are included? Does it matter what type of passport, digital or physical, is being used? One, again, thinking of the core of the motion, this motion is intended to discuss vaccine passports for COVID-19. It's not meant to talk about polio. It's not meant to talk about smallpox. It's clearly, based on the info slide, supposed to talk about COVID-19 passport, vaccine passports. So we want to make sure that that is what we are discussing in this debate. Secondly, does it matter what type of passport, digital or physical, is being used? Most likely not. We probably don't want to get into this like very small debate. So a debate that's not about the core of the motion, about is the app good enough, or what if I lose my vaccine card? That's not necessarily what this debate is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be about whether or not using vaccine passports in terms of the rights of people, or is this a good way to slow down COVID-19 spread, stuff like that. If a team wants to talk about we shouldn't use vaccine passports because the digital software is bad and people fake physical cards so they don't work, that's something different. But we shouldn't be just arguing what's better, digital or physical vaccine passports. That's kind of in the weeds. I just wanted to throw it out there. Second question, what are teams expected to discuss in this debate? One, the purpose of the passport. This was given in the info slide, to assist in reopening some economic activities during COVID-19. Two, the goals of vaccine passports. Why are countries implementing them? Why is this happening in the EU? Why is it happening in Bulgaria? We just had the Green Pass that was mandated into law. The success of similar measures in other countries and in Bulgaria. So by the time you debate this motion, this Green Pass law will have been in effect for what, 3 weeks? So how is it working? Is it achieving the goals that were set forth by this measure? The harms that are caused to people by mandating their use. So who's suffering from this kind of support or use of vaccine passport? And then lastly, what are the long-term implications of this type of policy? What other types of policies could be adopted using similar justifications? So what could the government do next because they are mandating vaccine passports in order to go to a restaurant or to a bar? What sort of regulations could EU countries use in the future if they are requiring vaccines for people to enter their countries? These are things to think about and things to talk about with your team, in addition to other things that you might want to discuss as well. Any questions? Okay, the last thing that I want to move into before we switch to the Eastern tournaments is a note about conduct, and something that I would encourage all coaches, SLs, and teammates to share with their teams, because during last week's seminar, we had a question about the sportsmanship rule, and we talked about how there's not going to be separate sportsmanship scores this year. And I felt like I heard some rumors about like disturbing or concerning intentions of people in debate rounds to mean that that means that they can curse out their opponents or use foul language that's like unnecessary, be rude to opponents, anything like that. And that is absolutely not acceptable. Just because there are no sportsmanship scores this year does not mean that your conduct will not affect your scores and your ability to compete in the best foundation debate programs. Your conduct in this debate round can affect your score at the discretion of the judge. So a judge can dock you points if they think that you're being disrespectful or you're using foul language or anything like that. They can just take it from your regular scores or even make you lose the debate because it's their discretion. And abusive behavior, like using racist slurs, using any sort of slurs, the full policy is outlined in this hyperlink here, or it's in the on the BEST website, can lead to disqualification and should absolutely not be encouraged or allowed. I want to make that clear. Please respect yourselves, respect your opponents, respect the judge, and respect the BEST Foundation when you are debating. I'm not saying you can't get heated. I'm not saying you can't make arguments that have emotion and are strong. I'm saying be respectful. Any questions? Okay, so next I want to move into a discussion of the East motions. Are there any people that have residual questions about the West motions or want me to go back or anything? Okay, so let's go into it. Oops. The first motion, given a trade-off, this House would direct environmental policy towards mitigation of climate change rather than prevention. Second, this House would ban individuals credibly accused of corruption from running for public office. Third, when resources are limited, this House supports hospitals that prioritize treatment of patients who are vaccinated against COVID-19 to patients who are not. We're going to follow the same formula and breakdown as we did earlier. So again, this one is about climate change policy and what we think is the best way to go about climate change. So let's just define some words first. A trade-off. This is something that I mentioned earlier. A trade-off is a situation in which you have to balance two opposing options. So basically means that if you do one of these options, you cannot do the other to a full extent. It can even mean that if you do one, you can't do the other. This idea, this phrasing of direct environmental policy or direct policy just means to push or to focus on. So how should we be focusing our environmental policy towards climate change? Mitigation, one of the terms in one of the options that we have, which means to lessen the effects of. So this would mean that climate change happens, we just have to adapt or mitigate those effects. So we're not going to try to curb or stop emitting carbon. We're not going to try to switch to renewable energy. We're just going to try to do things that help people survive after whatever the effects of climate change are. We will build taller buildings and strengthen buildings on the coast in case there are hurricanes, stuff like that. Yes, I see a question. Maria?
Thanks. Mitigation, climate change mitigation would only care for taking actions when the results are out in terms of trying to limit them or something like that?
Yes, in terms of, yes, exactly, limiting the
Okay.
effects of climate change. Very good.
But without concerning the source of climate change.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, very good question and great rephrasing. Any other questions? Okay, the next one, the other option is prevention. So prevention would be the other side. Stop the source. So try to prevent climate change or its effects from happening. And so we can see how those things, oppose one each other, why there's a trade-off. Should we focus on trying to prevent climate change from happening? Or should we say we're too far gone, we should invest in adaptation methods or strengthening buildings, moving people off the coasts, looking into things such as carbon capture, which you might read about, to mitigate those effects. So Maria, do you have another question or is your hand just still up?
I'm sorry, I forgot my hand up.
No worries. So let's talk about the core of the motion. What is this motion really asking? There are a lot of words, but it can boil down to something better. Easier. Which is better? Climate change prevention or climate change mitigation? That is what the motion is asking. I will say that teams have a little leeway to say like, we're not going to totally abandon what's happening right now. So say that we're already in the process of transitioning a coal power plant into one that's funded by renewable energy sources like wind or solar. That stuff can still happen. But when we're using the term direct environmental policy, that means that we are going to make a large shift in where we are putting our money, our resources, our energy into. Okay. Questions about this? I talk a little bit more in the next one as well. Yes, Maria.
Thank you. So you gave us advice to read about carbon. What did you actually say?
I'll type it in the chat.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. That was just an example. You may find it in your reading, in your research. I linked here a comparison website that talks about the differences of them. And I have some more websites linked later. But you'll see how you'll see where different policies or strategies fall just by looking up climate change prevention and climate change mitigation. I want to make a note, though, that in some articles, people use the word adaptation instead of the word mitigation. So make a note of this. Coaches, please make sure that you make a note of this. And for the purpose of this debate, adaptation is the same idea as mitigation. So adaptive policies are the same as mitigating policies, just so we're clear on research. Okay, now let's talk about the arguments that you should expect to see. One, probably talking about examples of mitigation or adaptation policies. 2, examples of prevention policies. 3, what are the positives and negatives of each? And 4, how do they compare? Which one's better? Which one's worse? Which one's more likely to work? Any questions? Okay. Next one. This House would ban individuals credibly accused of corruption from running for public office. Let's talk about some words and phrases. First, this House. I would say that in this motion, it would probably be good for the proposition team to define the House. Probably we want that to be Bulgaria, just to make it clear and make it a smaller debate, limit the debate. Again, thinking about what the core of this motion is, were in Bulgaria, Bulgarian students with mostly Bulgarian judges, and if not, American judges that are living in Bulgaria, we probably want to be talking about this in the context of Bulgaria. I would probably argue the same for the climate change one. We want to define this as Bulgaria. Secondly, corruption. What is corruption? A definition that I found was the use of power for private gain. This can look like a bunch of different things. It can mean pressuring government officials to do what you want by giving them money or by threatening to take away money or other incentives. It can look like pursuing policies that benefit private businesses or yourself without necessarily having a just reason. It can look like politicians doing shady stuff that they should not be doing. I linked here a good website that talks about corruption in Bulgaria. I linked a website here that talks about interesting definitions of corruption in terms of like political corruption and stuff like that. And then the last one, which I think is something that can be a little bit tricky, is this idea of credibly accused and why it's being used instead of the word convicted. So why are we using accused of corruption instead of convicted of corruption or has gone to jail or gone to court? So why that's being used is because a lot of times, especially, a lot of times historically, as well as in the present, people that are corrupt or that do corrupt practices are not tried for crimes. They don't go to court, they don't go to jail, they just continue to do those corrupt things. That's why we use the term credibly accused. And here are some ways that I would recommend defining this and what we should recommend or assume in this debate. Someone that's credibly accused of corruption is someone that's historically documented, as in there's evidence or proof of this, to have engaged in corruption. Someone recognized internationally as corrupt, so somebody that's been sanctioned by a credible government, the EU, the United States, by a government for being corrupt, or somebody that's accepted in most media outlets that are credible. So if those are international media outlets, if it's talked about, it's just assumed that that person is corrupt by talking about that evidence, bringing up the history. Those are things that are people that are credibly accused of corruption. Your local mayor whose opponent in the race published a hate ad saying that they're corrupt, but hasn't been talked about, which hasn't been mentioned anywhere else. Nobody's talked about it. It's just somebody that's being spiteful. That would not be a credibly accused person of corruption. Do we see that difference? I would say that this would be one of those examples where we don't want to have the debate talking about, is this person credibly accused? Is this person not credibly accused of corruption? There are plenty of people that are popular in Bulgarian politics right now that you can use that are unquestionably credibly accused of corruption. So for the sake of this debate, I would recommend that you would err on the side of caution and look for that evidence to be presented against them, look for those internationally recognized people that are corrupt, and focus debates on that, because that is where you're going to have a more fun debate. It's going to be more about the ideas and less about the details of going back and forth. Any questions on this before we go into, is that a hand? Melina?
Yes, hello. I'm sorry for the kind of weird question, but isn't this debate motion kind of one-sided? Because who would want a historically proven corrupt politician to be elected? I mean, I guess the only argument for that side is, false accusation. But besides from that, I think it's kind of one-sided.
Okay, that's totally fair. Let me get into the things that we would be talking about in the next slide, and then I'll come back to your question. How about that?
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, the core of the motion. What is this motion really asking? Should corrupt individuals that may or may not be charged with crimes be allowed to run for public office? What argument should you expect? What is corruption and why is it bad, or why could it be good? Maybe some examples of corrupt Bulgarian politicians or potential politicians. Who would be examples of non-corrupt alternative candidates? Are they there? How successful would this policy be if it were actually implemented? So to get to Melena's question, is this one-sided? Here are some things that I would think about on the other side of saying we should not ban individuals. One, why should the government have the power to ban people from running for an elected office? Shouldn't it be the people in a democracy that decides whether or not somebody that has ties to corruption is eligible to run? Secondly, if someone is so corrupt, wouldn't the people be able to see that, be able to identify that, and then not vote for them? If somebody is corrupt, credibly accused of corruption, and they're still winning, what's that saying about the values of the people voting for them? Clearly, the people believe that this person is the best candidate or the best choice that they have. So maybe there are no non-corrupt alternative candidates that would be able to get things done. Is there such a thing as a non-corrupt candidate that is capable of running the country? Another question I would think of. Somebody that was corrupt in 1980 when there was a different government in power, but has since worked against corrupt politicians, changed their ways, and now is like fighting for the people correctly. Why should that person be banned from running for public office? Those are some arguments that I would make on the other side of this debate. Does that make you feel better? Melina?
Kinda. I mean, I still have to kind of go over it in my head. So yeah, thank you for addressing it in the presentation.
Yeah, of course. Definitely talk to your teams. If you find yourself really stumped, I'll find some articles for you. So just message me later. Any other questions about this motion? Want me to slow down and talk about those other arguments again?
Maybe it will be best.
Okay. Let me take a second and type them out in the chat so that you guys can have them later. I'm going to type them out, so give me a minute or two. Was that another hand?
Yes, sorry, I know you're typing.
That's okay. Okay, give me 1 second. I typed those out. Desislava, what's your question?
So I wanted to ask, because there's a difference between running for public office and actually holding public office. So I wanted to ask if that is something that we can talk about, or would that be taking the debate in a bad direction? Like, would that be away from the core of the motion?
That is a great question. And I think that that has to do with the second point that I put in the chat. So I think that a strong argument for the negative or for the opposition team is about, we're not saying that they shouldn't, is that we should allow everybody to run and let the people decide who is worthy of being elected to public office, right? So, for example, that is a really good distinction, very good thinking. So we should allow everybody that wants to run, and one, let the people decide, and two, not let the government interfere with who is able to, be elected by the people. How does that, that could trade off or go away from the core of a democracy, right? So that's a really good question.
Thank you.
Janina?
Yes. Is it possible for one side of the debate, the proposition I assume, to bring up how corrupt politicians might affect the integrity of the election?
Yeah, I think that's a good argument. And maybe that also is a reason why the wording is running for public office versus holding public office. Yeah, good argument. Other questions or thoughts? Okay. The last motion. And also, if you come up with questions later or you want me to go back, I think we should have some time at the end and we can talk about those. The last motion. When resources are limited, this House supports hospitals that prioritize treatment of patients who are vaccinated against COVID-19 to patients who are not. Let's define some words. Limited resources. What does this mean? In the context of COVID, this likely means that there's a shortage of doctors, of nurses, of ICU beds, so intensive care beds, ventilators, medications, something like that. So limited resources in the context of a hospital or a doctor's office. Prioritize. What does prioritize mean? Similar, this just means give preferential treatment towards. It's the same type of thought process that we use with the climate change debate, mitigate versus prevent. Prioritize is, should we prefer to give these limited treatments to vaccinated patients to not vaccinated patients? Okay, questions about these definitions I've given or other words in this debate before we talk about the core of the motion? What's this motion really asking? This motion is trying to get to the question of, is it ethical for hospitals to prefer vaccinated people to unvaccinated people? Or is it ethical for hospitals to prefer one group of people over another when resources are limited? I linked an article that talks about general principles of ethics. Most of them, they might use big words, or they might, explain things in more detail, but they're likely what you already think of ethics. So an ethical behavior is one that, I see a question. Oh, that's a good question. Ethics is like how people go about behaviors or like the decision rules that they follow when making choices. Kadir asks, is the treatment supposed to mean COVID-19 treatment or potentially other treatments? That's a good question. Personally, I think that a debate about just COVID treatment would be fine, but I also think that a debate about all types of treatment would also be fine. So both, I think, would be the core of the motion and would mean different debates. I would probably lean towards generally all types of treatments. Okay, yeah, Lena agrees. Because when we're thinking about it, say that the ICU has 10 beds and 10 of them are filled with unvaccinated people that are suffering from COVID-19. And then say that somebody that is in a severe car crash that's vaccinated goes to the hospital and needs an ICU bed. That person is still negatively impacted by unvaccinated people, right, that are taking up the ICU beds. So should their treatment be prioritized? That could be a potential situation that you could bring up. I think that's a good debate. Was that a question or a hand raised?
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Actually, when taking into consideration that there are, sorry for my voice, I'm kind of sick. Because there are separate ICU beds for COVID patients and separate ICU beds for, non-COVID patients, how is this going to affect the motion as in, talking about all kinds of treatment? Because, legally they cannot put COVID patients and non-COVID patients in the same ICU wards. They have different ones.
That's a good question. You could think about it in the context of nurses or doctors or equipment that might be in the ICU only wards that could otherwise be used for non-COVID patients. So if an unvaccinated COVID patient is using the last ventilator and a car crash victim that is vaccinated is not using the or is in need of the ventilator, or a vaccinated person that just needs the ventilator who gets that ventilator. So it doesn't necessarily have to be space. It could be other resources as well.
But wouldn't that because when there are limited resources, for example, if there are only 15 ventilators in the hospital and they have a ICU COVID ward with 10 beds and a non-COVID ICU ward with 10 beds as well, wouldn't they just, for example, cut off 5 beds from the non-COVID ICU ward? Because I think that's how it works. I'm pretty sure that the beds depend on how much ventilators they have. So they just wouldn't have it available, if that makes any sense. I'm sorry, I kind of explained it in a complicated way.
So
Or should
I
we just
think
leave that to be discussed in the debate? I don't know.
I would probably say that I don't fully understand your question, but I do think that your question brings up a good point in that debaters should probably look up what standards are now. How does it work? How do we separate COVID patients or COVID ventilators from non-COVID ventilators and stuff like that? I would also try to encourage you to think about in the long term what this looks like. So say 2 or 3 years ago, 2 or 3 years from now, non-COVID patient or non-vaccinated patients are still, draining resources or something like that. How should that be treated if 85% of a country is vaccinated? How should we distribute those resources? Do you have another question?
No, thank you.
Yep, okay, perfect. Let's talk, okay, so the core of the motion, what is this motion really asking? Is it ethical for hospitals to prefer vaccinated people to unvaccinated people? So what type of argument should we expect? One, people are probably going to be talking about different ethical theories or ethical models. Should this ever occur? What do we have to do in the terms of medicine when discussing ethics? Here, I linked something to an article to something that discusses bioethics, which is basically ethical decision-making in when talking about livelihood or human lives. Another argument that you should expect or discussion, should there be a preference at all of any sort of patients, or what does that preference look like now? How would this motion change those preferences? And how should this motion be discussed in the context of people who medically cannot receive the vaccine? If someone would have a severe allergic reaction to the vaccine, why should they be negatively impacted again by this policy if it's doctors that are the ones that are saying that they can't get it? some arguments to think of. You're welcome to talk about a lot more, Melina. I think you brought in a bunch of good points that are really good arguments to think of, especially in a model. So for proposition teams, the model would probably describe a little bit more of the details and what you're talking about, and giving a clear example in both worlds. So the proposition team should give a really good example of a reason why we should prioritize that treatment. And the opposition team should probably also give a really good example about who would be hurt by this sort of policy, why we should not. Those are the outlines that I had so far for the motions. Are there other questions that I can answer?
Yes, actually, I have a question. Hello. Okay, about this motion, is it possible to ask about Hippocratic oath, about the ideas of the doctors, because that's very important for them to do their jobs properly. And
Absolutely. That's a very good argument and a very good discussion, and I would encourage you to bring it up in the debate.
okay, thank you. And maybe I don't think about that, but what can be the counter argument about this? Because I don't actually think that.
So why we shouldn't prioritize this treatment?
Yes.
I think that the third bullet point that I have here would cover some arguments like that. So somebody that can't get the vaccine are clearly hurt by this, and it could be a life or a death situation. It also could be a thing about respecting people's choices to get vaccinated or not. So we should not be changing hospital policy about something that's not already mandated by the government. So if the government is not mandating everyone gets a vaccine, why are hospitals now being supported that are, implementing a policy that could hurt people that choose not to get vaccinated?
Yes. Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I understand.
Yeah, perfect. Any other questions? Melina, is your hand up again, or is it just not lowered?
It's just not lowered, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Okay. So we are right at 9 o'clock. So I want to make sure that I respect everybody's time. For the purpose of this recording, the next slides that I have is about kind of time allocation for interpreting impromptu motions. You are welcome to stay, but that is all I will be covering regarding like fall and east motion. I mean, west and east motions for now. And I'm just going to go into maybe like a 5-minute discussion about impromptu motions next. So if you are going to head out, thank you so much for coming. If you have any other questions, please ask your coach. Coaches, I am going to be sending out a link to the recordings. I'll send out versions of all of these PowerPoints that I've used. And I'm also going to be posting in all of the Facebook pages a link to a feedback form within the next week that I hope that you will fill out so that I can know how to improve these for next semester. They're going to be anonymous, but please do that. And then if you think to yourselves, you do research, you talk with your team, you talk with your coaches, and you still feel like you're really confused about something or emotions really unbalanced and you don't know what to do, you can reach out to me, send an email to the best email, or you can message me on Facebook or something like that. Well, send an email to the best email. That is it for our seminars. Best of luck to you all that are going to be competing in the tournaments. Thank you so much for coming. And then if you're sticking around, I'll wait for maybe like 15 more seconds before I move into the impromptu stuff. Okay. Okay, for those of you who are still around, I'm going to be talking a little bit about how to interpret impromptu motions, and I put some timestamps on there to hopefully help you. What you'll see is that this is very similar to the structure that I suggest for prepared motions, but again, to remind you, impromptu debate motions are given to teams and their side, which side of the debate they'll be debating 30 minutes before the debate round starts. And when teams are given this motion, they can only use themselves, so a person and their two teammates. They can use printed materials that they brought with them, so dictionaries, encyclopedias. If you printed out articles about the topic, or you've written down arguments or thoughts about the topic beforehand, you're welcome to use that. But you cannot use outside materials. So you cannot use the internet, you can't use your phone, you can't talk to your coach, you can't talk to the other debate team that's a part of your school. You can't talk to anybody outside of the two of you, the three of you of your debate team, and the resources that you brought with you. If you are found to be using those outside resources, you will likely be disqualified for that debate, which nobody wants. So I can seem kind of nerve-wracking. What if we have no idea what the topic is? What if we don't know what to do? One, take a deep breath. You likely know more than you think. I've also posted the topic areas for both of the tournaments on the Facebook page, or not the Facebook, on the tournament page on the website. So what you should be doing now is paying attention to what is going on. I think one of the areas is pop culture. So what is popular culture right now? Maybe reading articles about that, reading, newspapers, or just keeping up to date about what those topic areas are, so that you're prepared to talk about current events or commonly discussed topics that are occurring right now. I am not giving you something that is meant to throw you for a loop, make a bad debate, make you feel bad about yourself. That is not the purpose of these debates. The purpose of them is to challenge you to really think about an issue and think about using your brain and your preparation materials to develop arguments in a much faster pace. So don't get stressed. Take a deep breath and then follow these steps. Timeline. The times that I give you are suggested. Obviously, you can adjust them as you see fit. I also would suggest doing practice impromptu motions with your debate coach. They can easily Google impromptu World Schools debate motions, and you can do a practice preparation, even if you don't do the debate, to see how this would work and mimic the situation. So first step is you're given the motion, you're given the side, similar to the prepared motion. Each team member should think individually about arguments that they want to make for their position. What you should be thinking about here is, oh, that's a typo actually, is what arguments do we want to go into the first prop one speech or the first opposition speech? What are our main arguments? We want to spend about 2 to 3 minutes doing this. The next 5 to 7 minutes, all team members should get together, discuss their ideas, and find common themes, arguments, the team line, which you'll do in the next step or kind of concurrently, which is deciding on a team line or what your thesis is that is supported by the arguments. Next, you want to pick the best 2, 3, or 4 arguments and organize them into an outline. This outline is very similar to the one that you use for the prepared motions. It's the same. And you want to make sure that when you're doing this, somebody should be asking the question, how does this argument support the team line? If it doesn't support the team line, does the argument need to change or does the team line need to change? Either of those things should be happening. But you want to make sure that it's one coherent case, one coherent set of arguments. Step 5, and kind of while this is happening, so you don't have to just wait till step 5 to do this, but make sure that you are thinking of evidence, stories, facts, hypothetical situation to support your points of view and add them to your outline. So if you have something printed, if you have a dictionary definition, if you can think of some great uncle Sue who had this issue and was negatively affected by it. Whatever it is, throw it in there. Make sure you're noting it on your outline. Any remaining time is when you would want to, write your intro, write your conclusion, write your speech. People that are in the second speaker and the third speaker should probably be predicting the opponent's case and arguments so that you can start your rebuttal. And you also want to probably predict opponent's rebuttals to your case. So where are the weak points? What's your strongest argument? What arguments do you need to make sure are carried through the entire debate? Something that I did not note here, but I think is really important, is that you want to make sure that your team is all on the same page. Every person should be writing down the outline, the team line, knowing who's talking about what, when, and what arguments absolutely need to be brought up throughout the entire debate. That's really, really important and should be your focus. I think that is what I have for this timeline. If I'm missing anything or you have any questions, please let me know now.
Yeah, actually, I have a question.
Perfect.
Does the team get the information for whether they're going to be proposition or opposition when given the motion, or they're supposed to brainstorm ideas for both? And
Good question. The team only has to prepare one side of the debate. They're told which side they will be when the motion is given.
Okay.
Mhm. Other questions? Okay, then this is the official end. I already gave my announcements. So coaches, be on the lookout for that email that will be coming to you in the next couple of days. Students, please check the Facebook pages because I'll probably be posting the same information, assuming I'm allowed to. And please fill out the feedback forms. And thank you all for coming again. And best of luck at your tournaments. I'm so excited for you. You're going to do great. You're prepared. You're awesome. You're smart. Good luck.
Thanks.
Thanks. Goodbye.
Bye.
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 Thank you.
Good luck, everyone. See you
Good luck.
soon.
Bye.
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 Ah.